Queen Valithra stood alone on the shattered bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Sovereignty. And she knew that death was coming for her and everyone she commanded. The lights flickered above her head as another explosion rocked the massive vessel. And she grabbed the broken railing to keep herself from falling to the floor, her beautiful iridescent carapace. The shell that covered her body like living armor was cracked in 3 places and leaked pale blue blood that dripped onto the metal beneath. Her feet she had 4 arms like all Sarathan royalty. And right now all 4 of them were trembling with exhaustion and fear around her. The remnants of her bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to keep the dying ship alive for just a few more hours. "My queen," said Admiral Ketharin, his voice heavy with defeat. "We have lost another 3 vessels in the last rotation, and the swarm is regrouping for what appears to be their final assault." Valithra closed her large oval eyes and let the weight of his words settle into her heart. She had started this journey with 90 warships, the pride of the Sarathan Dominion, a fleet that had not known defeat in over 2,000 cycles. Now she had 12 ships remaining, and most of those were burning. The Kethvari swarm had ambushed them in the neutral expanse. Far from any allied territory, far from any hope of rescue, the swarm was a nightmare-given form. A species of living ships that consumed everything in their path. And they had caught her fleet completely by surprise. "How many of the enemy remain?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. "Our sensors count 237 bioships, my queen, and more are arriving through the gateway every hour. 237. Against 12. There would be no victory here. Only death." Valithra opened her eyes and looked at the viewscreen, where she could see the swarm circling her broken fleet like predators waiting for wounded prey to finally stop moving her. People had ruled their sector of the galaxy for 10,000 cycles. And in all that time, no Sarathan monarch had ever done what she was about to do. "Open a channel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "on all frequencies, to every species within range of our signal." Admiral Ketharin stared at her with shock in his eyes, and she could see other crew members turning to look at her with the same expression. "My queen," the Admiral said carefully, "you cannot mean to ask for help, as such a thing has never been done in our history. And the shame it would bring upon the Dominion would be—" "The shame of asking for help," Valithra interrupted him, "is nothing compared to the shame of letting my people die because I was too proud to try." She straightened her spine and lifted her head high, even though every movement sent pain shooting through her injured body. "Open the channel, Admiral, and that is a command from your queen." The Admiral bowed his head and obeyed. And within moments the signal was broadcasting across the stars. Valithra spoke into the void, sending her words to every ship and station and planet that could hear them. "This is Queen Valithra of the Sarathan Dominion, and I am requesting immediate military assistance in the neutral expanse at the following coordinates." She paused and took a breath that hurt her damaged lungs. "My fleet has been ambushed by the Kethvari swarm, and we are outnumbered and outgunned, and we will not survive without aid from those who might call themselves our friends." The message went out, and then there was nothing to do but wait. Hours passed, and the responses began to arrive. And each one was a knife in Valithra's heart. The collective sent their condolences and their wishes for a peaceful transition to the afterlife. But they would not send ships, the Orion mandate cited jurisdictional concerns and resource allocation priorities and other meaningless words that meant they would not help the Volanthi. Federation expressed deep sorrow but explained that their fleet was engaged elsewhere and could not be diverted one by one. The great powers of the galaxy sent their excuses, their apologies, their empty words of sympathy, and one by one, Valithra felt hope dying inside her chest. "We are alone," Admiral Ketharin said quietly, and there was no accusation in his voice. Only the tired acceptance of someone who had made peace with death, Valithra was about to agree with him when a young officer at the communications station made a sound of surprise. "My queen," the officer said, "we are receiving a response from the Outer Rim, from a species called humans." Valithra searched her memory for information about them and found very little. They were a young species, having achieved faster than light travel only 300 cycles ago, which was barely a heartbeat in galactic terms. They came from a small blue planet called Earth, and they had no natural weapons, no armor, no telepathy, no venom. They were soft and fragile and short-lived, and they had almost no presence in galactic politics. "What do they say?" she asked, not expecting anything useful. The young officer read the message aloud, and his voice was confused as if he did not quite believe what he was reading. "Hold position. Help is coming. Estimated time of arrival 7 hours." Silence fell across the bridge, and then Admiral Kethoran let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "Humans?" he said, and there was bitter amusement in his voice. "The soft ones with no claws and no shells are going to save us from the swarm." Other officers began to murmur among themselves, and Valithra could hear the doubt and even mockery in their voices. She understood their reaction because she felt the same way. What could humans possibly do against the Kethvori swarm? What could a species that had been traveling the stars for only 3 centuries do against a threat that had devoured entire civilizations? And yet, as she looked at the message on her screen, she felt something strange and unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It was such a simple message, so direct and confident. "Hold position. Help is coming." Not "we will try" or "we will see what we can do," but simply "help is coming," as if there was no doubt at all. For the first time in many hours, Queen Valithra allowed herself to feel the smallest spark of something that might have been hope. It was foolish. She knew to put any faith in a species she knew nothing about. But when you are drowning in the dark, even the smallest light seems like a miracle. "Acknowledge their message," she told the communications officer, "and send them our gratitude." Then she turned back to the view screen and watched the swarm circling in the distance. And she whispered words that only she could hear. "Come quickly, little humans, because we do not have much time." Commander Elena Vasquez was running combat drills aboard the UN's Prometheus when the priority message arrived, and she read it 3 times before she allowed herself to believe what it said. Sarathan fleet was dying in the neutral expanse, and someone had decided that she and her crew were the ones who would save them. She did not hesitate. Not even for a second, because hesitation was not something Elena Vasquez had ever understood. Within 30 minutes, she was standing in the briefing room of the Prometheus, looking at a holographic display that showed the enemy forces they would be facing. 237 Kethvori bioships, each one a living nightmare of teeth and acid and hunger. The swarm was feared across the galaxy for good reason, and most species would rather run for 100 light years than face even a single one of their vessels. Elena looked at the numbers and felt something stir in her chest, something hot and fierce that made her hands curl into fists. "How many ships do we have in range?" she asked her tactical officer. "Lieutenant Commander Park." "4, ma'am," Park replied, and his voice was steady, even though his eyes showed that he understood how insane this mission was. The Prometheus, the Relentless, the Dawn Treader, and the Valiant, 4 ships against 237. Elena smiled. "And it was not a nice smile. That should be enough," she said. "Now tell me about our ground forces." This was the part that mattered most, because Elena knew that space battles were won by ships, but wars were won by the soldiers, who refused to stop fighting. She had spent 3 hours going through personnel files, selecting names from a list that the United Nations Defense Force kept in a special database. The database was called the Registry of Exceptional Service, and it contained the names of soldiers who had done things that seemed impossible, not superhuman things, because humans were not superhuman, but things that showed what a human could do when they refused to give up. The first name on her list was Sergeant Major David Okonkwo, a mountain of a man from Nigeria who had once held a defensive position on Mars for 18 hours against a pirate siege. His ammunition had run out after the first 6 hours, and he had spent the remaining 12 hours fighting with a combat knife and anything else he could use as a weapon when rescue finally arrived. They found him standing over the bodies of 43 pirates, covered in blood that was mostly not his own. And his first words were to ask if anyone had brought food, because he was very hungry. The second name was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a small woman from Singapore, who looked like she should be teaching mathematics at a university instead of commanding a fire team. But Lieutenant Chen had once calculated a firing solution in her head during a complete systems blackout, using nothing but her memory of star positions and her understanding of physics. She had fired a single missile that traveled for 40,000 kilometers and struck an asteroid that would have killed 6 million colonists on the planet below. When asked how she had done it, she had simply shrugged and said that the math was not that difficult if you paid attention in school. The third name was Private First Class Kowalski, a young man from Poland who had only been a soldier for 4 years, but had already earned more commendations than veterans, twice his age on Kepler 442b. He had carried 3 wounded squad mates through 12 kilometers of toxic jungle while bleeding from 7 separate wounds. The medic said he should have died after the first 3 kilometers. But Kowalski did not seem to care what the medics thought was possible. He had kept walking until he reached the extraction point, and only then had he allowed himself to collapse. There were 44 other names on Elena's list, 44 men and women who had all done things that defied what should have been possible. Some had survived conditions that should have killed them 10 times over. Some had fought when every logical part of their brain told them to surrender. Some had saved lives at the cost of their own bodies, accepting wounds and pain that would have broken anyone else. They were not special because they were stronger or faster or smarter than other humans. They were special because when the universe told them that something was impossible, they simply refused to listen. Elena gathered them all in the main cargo bay of the Prometheus. 47 soldiers standing at attention in their black and gray combat armor. She walked among them, looking at their faces, seeing the scars and the steady eyes and the quiet confidence that came from having already survived things that should have killed them. "You all know why we are here," she said, her voice carrying across the bay. "A species we have never met sent out a call for help, and we answered that call." She paused and let her words sink in. "The enemy we are about to face is the HFY swarm, and they have 237 ships to our 4, and they are considered one of the most dangerous threats in the galaxy." A few of the soldiers smiled at this, and Elena felt pride warming her chest. "The other species of the galaxy think we are soft," she continued. "They look at us and see creatures with no armor, no claws, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind." She stopped walking and turned to face them all. "They forget that we come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, and we did not just survive. We conquered it." Her voice grew harder, fiercer, and she let them see the fire that burned inside her. "They forget that we hunted animals 10 times their size with nothing but pointed sticks and the refusal to give up, and that we built cities in deserts and on mountains and in frozen wastelands where nothing should be able to live." She raised her fist, and 47 soldiers raised their fists in response. "Today we are going to remind the galaxy what happens when you corner something from Earth." The soldiers roared, a sound that echoed off the metal walls and filled the bay with thunder. "We are going to board those living ships," Elena shouted over the noise. and we are going to tear them apart from the inside. And we are going to save every single Saracen who is still alive." She lowered her fist, and her voice grew quiet. But every soldier heard her clearly, because that is what humans do when someone asks us for help. And we do not care how big the enemy is or how bad the odds are. The Prometheus shuddered as its engines powered up for the jump to slipspace. And Elena looked at her soldiers one last time. "The Sarathens are afraid and alone and waiting for someone to save them," she said. "Let us not keep them waiting any longer." The ship jumped, and the stars blurred into lines of light, and 47 humans prepared themselves to do the impossible. The 4 human ships dropped out of slipspace directly into the middle of a nightmare. And Commander Elena Vasquez felt her heart beat faster as she looked at the view screen. The HFY swarm filled the darkness of space like a living wall of horror. Hundreds of massive bioships circling the broken remains of the Sarathan fleet. Each swarm ship was a creature unto itself, a twisted thing of flesh and bone and chitin that pulsed with a hunger that could be felt even through the cold void. They had no metal, no technology in the way other species understood it, because they were their own ships and their own weapons and their own armor. 12 surviving Sarathan vessels huddled together in the center of the circle, their hulls torn and burning, their weapons silent because they had nothing left to fire. Elena could see escape pods drifting between the larger ships, carrying survivors who were too afraid to broadcast for help because they did not want the swarm to notice them. "Open a channel to the swarm," Elena ordered, and her voice was calm and steady, even though she knew what was about to happen. "Channel open." "Commander," said her communications officer. Elena stood tall and spoke clearly, making sure every word was heard. "HFY swarm. This is Commander Elena Vasquez of the United Nations ship Prometheus, and you are engaged in an unprovoked attack on vessels that are now under human protection." She paused for exactly 3 seconds. "You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this sector, or we will interpret your continued presence as an act of war against Earth and humanity." The response came not in words, because the swarm did not speak, but in action. 40 bioships broke away from the circling mass and turned toward the human vessels. Their organic hulls rippling with anticipation, they moved fast, faster than anything that Psi should be able to move. And they screamed through space toward the 4 tiny human ships. "They are not retreating." "Commander," Lieutenant Commander Park said, and there was dark humor in his voice. "I think we hurt their feelings." Elena smiled and nodded. "All ships, execute attack pattern Omega 7, she ordered. "Boarding teams, prepare for launch." What happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The human ships did not retreat, and they did not take defensive positions, and they did not do any of the things that a sane commander would do when facing odds of 10 to 1 instead. They accelerated directly into the oncoming wave of bioships. Prometheus led the charge, her engines burning at maximum power as she raced toward the enemy. When she was close enough to see the individual teeth lining the swarm ship's hulls, she released her cargo. 20 boarding pods shot out from her sides, each one a small armored capsule carrying 2 or 3 human soldiers in powered combat suits. The pods were designed to punch through organic matter, and that is exactly what they did. They hit the bioships like bullets hitting flesh, their hardened tips drilling through chitin and muscle until they were deep inside the living vessels, and then the humans came out. And the real battle began on the bridge of the Eternal Sovereignty. Queen Valithera watched the battle unfold on her tactical display and could not believe what she was seeing. "They are boarding the swarm ships," Admiral Kethoran said, and his voice was filled with something between horror and wonder. "No one has ever successfully boarded a swarm ship." Valithera knew this was true, because she had studied the swarm for most of her life. The inside of a swarm bioship was a death trap for any species that tried to enter it. The air was toxic, filled with chemicals that would dissolve lungs and burn eyes and melt skin. The blood that flowed through the vessel's living walls was acid, capable of eating through most known armor in seconds, and the walls themselves fought back, contracting and expanding and sprouting tendrils to crush and consume any invader. Every species that had ever tried to board a swarm ship had died, which was why no one did it anymore, but the humans were doing it anyway. Valithra switched her display to show the feed from a Sarathan probe that had drifted close to one of the boarded bioships. What she saw made her stop breathing. A human in black armor was moving through a corridor of living flesh, firing a weapon that sprayed something like liquid fire at anything that tried to stop her. The walls were reaching for her, trying to crush her, but she was too fast. Ducking and rolling and never stopping her forward movement, behind her came two more humans, covering her back, shooting at the tendrils and growths that tried to attack from behind. "That is impossible," Admiral Cathorn whispered. "The atmosphere alone should have killed them by now." But the humans were not dying. Their armor was smoking and hissing where the acid blood had splashed on it, and Valithra could see warning lights flashing on their suits. But they kept moving forward. They reached what looked like a junction point, a place where several corridors came together, and the lead human held up her fist to signal a stop. She pulled something from her belt, a small package that blinked with a steady red light, and she placed it against the wall. Then she and her team ran back the way they had come, moving even faster than before. 5 seconds later, the explosion tore through the bioship's nervous system, and the massive creature screamed in a frequency that could be heard across the entire battlefield. Valithers watched as the bioship began to thrash and spin, its movements becoming erratic and uncontrolled. The humans had destroyed its brain on another part of the battlefield. She saw a second bioship suffering the same fate, and then a third, and then a fourth. The humans were not trying to destroy the swarm ships from the outside. Where their organic armor was strongest, they were killing them from the inside, targeting the weak points that no external weapon could reach. "Commander Vasquez," Valithra said, opening a channel to the human flagship, "your soldiers are inside those ships, and you need to get them out before the creatures die." The human commander's face appeared on her screen, and Valithra was surprised to see that she was smiling. "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty," Vasquez said, "but my people know what they are doing, and they will get themselves out," as if to prove her words. Valithra saw boarding pods bursting out of the dying bioships, carrying the human soldiers away from the thrashing corpses. The pods flew back to the human ships, were quickly taken aboard, and then launched again toward new targets. The humans were using the same soldiers over and over, sending them into one bioship after another. Killing the creatures from within it was brutal and efficient and absolutely insane. And it was working. The swarm had never faced anything like this. And for the first time in anyone's memory, the Cathvori began to show something that looked very much like fear. Queen Valithra had lived for 400 cycles, and in that time she had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of stars, and the death of worlds. She had believed that she understood the universe and the creatures that lived within it. She had been wrong about so many things. The battle had been raging for 6 hours now, and Valithra had spent most of that time watching the tactical feeds from the human boarding teams. At first she had watched because she wanted to understand their tactics, to learn how they were accomplishing what every other species had failed to do. Now she watched because she could not look away, because what she was seeing had changed something inside her that she did not fully understand on one screen. She watched Lieutenant Sarah Chun navigating through a bioship's neural corridor. Walls around Chun were contracting and expanding, trying to crush her, and Valithra could see that the human's armor had been breached in several places. Acid blood had gotten through, and it was eating into Chun's shoulder. and the pain must have been beyond anything Velithra could imagine. But Chun did not stop. She kept moving forward, her movements precise and controlled, placing explosive charges at key points along the corridor. Helmet camera showed her vital signs in the corner of the display, and Velithra could see that the human's heart was beating far too fast and that her blood pressure was dropping from blood loss. Any Sarathan soldier would have collapsed by now, would have called for extraction, would have accepted that the mission was over. But Chun kept walking, kept fighting, kept doing her job, even though her body was screaming at her to stop. She reached the brainstem of the bioship, a thick bundle of nerve tissue that pulsed with electrical signals, and she placed her final charge against it. Then she turned and ran back through the corridor, her wounded arm hanging limp at her side, her boots slipping in the acid and blood that covered the floor. She made it to her boarding pod with 3 seconds to spare before the charges detonated and killed the bioship. On another screen, Velithra watched Sergeant Major Okonkwo at a choke point inside a different bioship was alone, the rest of his team having moved ahead to plant charges while he held the corridor against the flood of Kathvori drones that were trying to reach them. The drones were small compared to the bioships, each one about the size of a human, with sharp claws and acid-dripping mouths. They came at Okonkwo in waves, climbing over each other in their eagerness to tear him apart. He shot them at first, his weapon filling the corridor with thunder and light. But eventually, his ammunition ran out. Any other soldier would have retreated, would have fallen back to find more ammunition or to escape. But Okonkwo dropped his empty weapon and pulled out a plasma torch, a tool meant for cutting through metal, not for fighting. And then he waded into the drones with nothing but that torch and his armored fist. Of Velithra watched him fight, and she heard the sound coming through his helmet microphone, and she realized with shock that he was the laugh of a madman, but the laugh of someone who was genuinely enjoying himself. Was covered in acid blood that was slowly eating through his armor, surrounded by enemies that outnumbered him 100 to 1. And he was laughing as if this was the most fun he had ever had. The Sarathan queen did not understand, could not understand, how a creature could feel joy in such a moment. But she could not deny what she was seeing on a third screen. She found something that affected her more deeply than anything else she had. Witness Private First Class Kowalski was inside a bioship that was dying, its systems failing after the human team had destroyed its core. The ship was collapsing around him, walls closing in, decks folding together. And he should have been running for the extraction point, but he was not running. He was carrying someone, a Sarathan soldier in damaged armor, one of her own people who must have been taken prisoner by the swarm. The Sarathan was barely alive, their carapace cracked and their breathing shallow, and they were clearly not important enough to risk a human life to save Velithra's own tactical officer. Had seen the same feed and had opened a channel to the human soldier. The tactical officer had said, "That Sarathan is non-essential personnel, and you should leave them and save yourself, as your life is worth more to the war effort." Kowalski had looked at the camera with eyes that burned with something Velithra had never seen before. "No one gets left behind," he had growled. "That is not how we do things." And then he had kept walking, carrying the wounded Sarathan through the dying ship, his own legs shaking with exhaustion, his own wounds bleeding through his damaged armor. He had made it to the extraction pod with seconds to spare, and he had held the Sarathan soldier in his arms the whole way back to the human ship. Velithra turned off the display and sat in silence for a long moment around her. Her bridge crew continued to work, monitoring the battle that was slowly turning in their favor, but the Queen's mind was far away, thinking about what she had seen and what it meant. She had studied humans in the diplomatic archives before this battle began. The archives had described them as fragile, short-lived, emotionally unstable, and prone to making decisions based on feelings rather than logic. The archives had made them sound weak, like children playing at being a galactic power, but the archives had been wrong. So completely and utterly wrong. These humans were not weak. They were the most terrifying thing Velithra had ever seen. Not because they were stronger or faster or more powerful than other species. Because they were not. They were terrifying because they simply refused to accept the limits that the universe tried to place on them. Their bodies told them they were dying, and they kept fighting. Their minds told them a situation was hopeless, and they kept trying. Their logic told them to abandon a stranger to save themselves, and they refused. Velithra had built her understanding of the universe on the assumption that all creatures acted in their own self-interest. That survival was the primary goal of every living thing, but these humans did not seem to care about their own survival. Not when others needed their help. They had crossed half the galaxy to answer the distress call of a species they had never met. A species that had never done anything for them. They had thrown themselves into battle against impossible odds. Not for territory or resources or political advantage, but simply because someone had asked for help. Velithra felt something she had not experienced in 200 cycles. Something that made her feel small and humble and strangely hopeful. She felt admiration for a species she had dismissed as insignificant, and she felt shame for ever thinking that strength was measured in armor and claws and venom. True strength, she was beginning to understand, was something else entirely. True strength was found in those who ran toward danger instead of away from it. True strength was found in those who bled for strangers and called it duty. True strength was found in those who looked at the impossible and said, "I will try anyway." The humans had shown her what true strength looked like, and she would never forget it. The battle lasted 11 hours, and when it was finally over, the neutral expanse was filled with the floating corpses of dead bioships. Queen Velithra stood at the view screen of her damaged flagship and counted the enemy dead. And she still could not believe what had happened. 192 Kethvari bioships destroyed, their bodies drifting lifelessly through the void. The remaining 45 had fled into deep space, broadcasting pheromone signals of terror that would keep the swarm away from this sector for generations. No species had ever made the Kethvari retreat before. No species had ever given them a reason to be afraid until now. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, her left arm in a sling and bandages covering a wound on her forehead. She had taken a piece of shrapnel during the battle when a swarm fighter had gotten close enough to damage her ship. But she had refused to leave the bridge, even when the medics had begged her around her. Her crew was working to repair the damage and tend to the wounded, and the mood was a strange mixture of exhaustion and quiet pride. They had lost 2 ships in the battle, the Dawn Treader and the Valiant, both destroyed by concentrated swarm attacks. 18 human soldiers had died, their bodies recovered from boarding pods that had been breached or from bioships that had collapsed too. Quickly, each death was a weight on Elena's heart, a name she would carry with her for the rest of her life. But they had also saved thousands of Cerithan lives, and they had broken the back of a swarm fleet that had terrorized this region of space for decades. It was a victory, even if it did not feel like one. Commander, her communications officer said, "Queen Velithra is requesting to speak with you." Elena straightened her posture and tried to look like someone who had not been awake for 30 hours. "Put her through." The Queen's face appeared on the main view screen, and Elena was struck by how different she looked compared to their first communication before the battle. Velithra had seemed cold and distant, her alien features unreadable now. There was something in her large oval eyes that Elena recognized, something that looked very much like respect. "Commander Vasquez," the Queen said, and her voice was softer than Elena had expected. "I wish to express the gratitude of the Cerithan Dominion for your assistance." She paused, and Elena could see that the next words were difficult for her. We are in your debt, the Queen continued. And the Sarathan Dominion does not forget such things. Name your price, Commander, and we will pay it, whether you desire territory or technology or political alliance. Whatever you want is yours. Elena was quiet for a moment. Considering her response, she knew that most species would take advantage of this moment, would demand concessions that would benefit humanity for generations. It was what a smart commander would do, what a logical leader would do. But Elena Vasquez had not become a commander by being like everyone else. Your Majesty, she said, and she made sure to speak clearly so there would be no misunderstanding. We did not come here for payment. The Queen's eyes widened slightly, and Elena saw confusion on her alien face. We came because you needed help, Elena continued. And that is all the reason we needed. Silence stretched between them, and Elena could see that the Queen was struggling to understand. That is not how things are done in the galaxy, Valithra finally said. Every species acts in its own interest. Every favor must be repaid. Every debt must be settled. Elena smiled, and it was a warm smile. The kind she gave to people she genuinely liked. Maybe that is how things have always been done, she said. But maybe it is time for that to change. The Queen stared at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in her expression. It was small, barely noticeable. But Elena thought it might be the beginning of understanding. You are very strange creatures, Valithra said, and there was no insult in her voice. I do not think the galaxy knows what to make of you. Good, Elena replied. We like to keep people guessing. 3 months passed, and the galaxy continued to turn. The story of the Battle of the Neutral Expanse spread from system to system, growing larger with each telling species that had never heard of humans began to ask questions about the small blue planet called Earth and the strange soft creatures that lived there. The collective sent ambassadors to Earth, seeking to understand these beings who fought for strangers. The Orion Mandate quietly revised their military assessments, adding humans to the list of species that should not be underestimated. The Lanthi Federation began to regret their decision not to help, wondering what might have happened if they had stood beside the humans in battle. But the biggest change came from the Sarathan Dominion. Queen Valithra had returned to her homeworld and immediately called a meeting of the High Council, the governing body of the Dominion. For 3 days, she spoke to them about what she had witnessed, about the humans who had crossed the galaxy to help strangers and asked for nothing in return. She told them about Lieutenant Chun, who had kept fighting with acid eating through her shoulder. She told them about Sergeant Major Okonkwo, who had laughed while fighting impossible odds. She told them about Private Kowalski, who had refused to abandon a wounded Sarathan soldier, even though it nearly cost him his life. And when she was finished speaking, she made a proposal that shocked every member of the Council. The Sarathan Dominion, the oldest and proudest civilization in this sector of the galaxy, would request admission into the Terran Alliance. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. A complete reversal of everything the Dominion had stood for. Council debated for days, but in the end, they could not argue against what Valithra had shown them. The vote was unanimous when the news reached Earth. The human media did not know how to react. An elder species, one that had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years, was asking to join an alliance led by humanity. The diplomatic channels exploded with activity, and within weeks, the treaty was signed. At the signing ceremony, Queen Valithra was asked by a human journalist why she had made such an extraordinary decision. Her answer would be quoted in history books for the next 1,000 years. We believed that strength was found in armor, in venom, in cold logic and careful calculation, she said. The humans taught us differently. True strength is found in those who run toward the fire instead of away from it. True strength is found in those who bleed for strangers and call it an honor. True strength is found in those who refuse to abandon hope, even when hope is irrational. She paused, and looked at the human diplomats standing beside her. "We do not wish to rule such beings," she said. "We wish to stand beside them and across the galaxy." Species that had dismissed humanity as soft and weak and insignificant began to look at them with new eyes. They saw species that would cross the stars for a stranger's cry for help. They saw a species that measured strength not in weapons or armor, but in the willingness to sacrifice for others. They saw a species that simply refused to accept that anything was impossible, and they began to understand that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not a creature with claws or fangs or venom. The most dangerous thing in the universe was a creature that would never stop fighting, never stop trying, never stop caring, even when the odds were impossible, even when logic said to give up, even when the whole galaxy told them they could not win. The humans would keep fighting anyway, and that made them the most terrifying and the most wonderful species the galaxy had ever known on Earth. In a small military cemetery outside of Geneva, 80 new graves had been added to the rows of white markers. Each grave held a soldier who had died in the Battle of the Neutral Expanse, and each marker bore a simple inscription. They answered the call. Commander Elena Vasquez visited those graves every month, standing in silence before each one, remembering the faces and the names and the cards. She never forgot them. Not a single one, and neither did the galaxy, because the universe had learned something important on that day in the Neutral Expanse. It had learned that humanity was not soft, not weak, not insignificant. Humanity was something far more powerful than any of those things. Humanity was a species that cared, and that made all the difference in the end. That was what the galaxy remembered most, not the ships or the weapons or the tactics, but the simple fact that when strangers cried out for help, the humans had answered, and they always would.